In this lesson, we're continuing our discussion of suspect classifications that are subject to strict scrutiny under the Equal Protection Clause. Specifically, we're going to focus on benign discrimination and affirmative action under the Equal Protection Clause. So if you remember from our last lesson, we said that when the government passes a discriminatory law based on a suspect classification with the requisite intent to discriminate, the court will subject the law to strict scrutiny, which of course is our highest form of judicial review, to determine whether the law is constitutional under the Equal Protection Clause, even if the law purports to favor a protected class as a means of redressing the effects of past discrimination against the class. Okay, so we broke this concept down in a lot of detail in our last lesson, so I'm not going to rehash everything we talked about in our last lesson. But as we move into our discussion of benign discrimination and affirmative action, the important thing to remember here when we're thinking about, suspect classifications subject to strict scrutiny under the Equal Protection Clause, the important thing to remember as we move on in our discussion is there's really two types of discrimination that we can encounter in our equal protection analysis. We have invidious discrimination and benign discrimination. The important thing to recognize is in either case, we're applying strict scrutiny. When the government passes a discriminatory law based on a suspect classification with the requisite intent to discriminate, the court will subject the law to strict scrutiny. It doesn't matter whether that discrimination is benign or invidious. We're applying strict scrutiny in both cases. The difference, if you remember, between invidious discrimination and benign discrimination is whether or not the government is going to be able to justify their action under strict scrutiny. Remember, with invidious discrimination, this is like Brown v. Board of Education. This is like the government purposefully segregating schools, public schools, on the basis of race. It's invidious. It's purposeful, unequal treatment of a protected class that's placing a burden on that protected class. This is invidious. And, how can the government basically justify that type of discrimination under strict scrutiny? The answer is they can't. In almost all cases, the government is not going to be able to pass strict scrutiny with invidious discrimination. If the government is purposefully treating a protected class unequally and they're placing a burden on that protected class, how are they going to justify that action and pass constitutional muster under the Equal Protection Clause under the highest form of judicial review, which is strict scrutiny? And the answer is, in almost all cases, they can't. That law will be struck down, or that action or that law will be struck down in violation of the Equal Protection Clause. The difference is when we move past invidious discrimination into benign discrimination and affirmative action, rather than burdening the protected class, in these cases, the government's actually acting in good faith. They're trying to favor, they're passing laws or taking other action that favor the protected class, usually as a means of redressing the effects of past discrimination against the class. And the difference here is this is a far more justifiable action being taken by the government. We'll see in some cases, the government's actually going to be able to provide enough justification to get past strict scrutiny. So we're still applying strict scrutiny. Remember, it doesn't matter whether the discrimination is benign or invidious. It doesn't matter whether the discrimination is burdening a protected class or favoring a protected class. In both cases, we apply strict scrutiny. The difference is if the government is favoring a protected class, which is benign discrimination or affirmative action, the government's going to have far more justification to provide when the court is applying strict scrutiny to their action, which means they're going to have a far greater chance of prevailing, of having their action upheld as constitutional under the Equal Protection Clause, because they have more justification. Okay, and on this, the Supreme Court has held that the government has a compelling interest in remedying the effects of past discrimination against a minority suspect class, so long as the discrimination was practiced by the government itself. So it's unquestionable, right? The court has said it is unquestionable that the government has a compelling interest in remedying the effects of past discrimination against a minority suspect class. This is basically never an issue in our analysis. If the government is coming forward and they're saying, hey, look, we're trying to remedy the effects of past discrimination against a minority suspect class, right? So long as the discrimination was actually practiced by the government itself, right, the court is going to say, okay, that is a compelling interest. And remember, that's 1/2 of our strict scrutiny analysis. In order for the government to have their law or action upheld when the court is applying strict scrutiny, remember, the government has the burden of proving that that action is the least restrictive means to achieve a compelling government interest, right? It's got to be a narrowly tailored way to achieve a compelling government interest. And in this case, the court is saying, unequivocally, the Supreme Court, it is well established that the government has a compelling interest in remedying the effects of past discrimination against a minority suspect class. So 1/2 of our strict scrutiny analysis is going to be satisfied in these cases, where the government is saying, hey, look, we want to remedy the effects of past discrimination, so we're going to pass this law that favors this minority suspect class. We basically want to right our prior discriminatory wrongs by taking this action. Okay, and in those cases, the courts can say, okay, that's a compelling interest. And the question is going to be, is this the least restrictive means necessary to achieving that interest? In other words, is this law or action narrowly tailored to accomplish this compelling interest, which is remedying the effects of past discrimination? Okay, so one last time, we understand what the compelling interest is. Therefore, if the government has practiced discrimination against a minority suspect class, the government may pass a law or take other action that favors the minority suspect class without violating the Equal Protection Clause, so long as the law or action is narrowly tailored to remedy the effects of the past discrimination. Because if they have a compelling government interest and their action is narrowly tailored to achieve that interest, we know, okay, that means they pass strict scrutiny. Okay, so that's why we see when the government is passing law that purports to favor a protected class as a means of redressing the effects of past discrimination against the class, there's a chance they can prevail. Whereas in most cases, when we're applying strict scrutiny, we say, look, the government really doesn't have a realistic chance of prevailing here. You know, if they're engaged in invidious discrimination, they're not going to have any justification for that to survive strict scrutiny. But when they're favoring the protected class, well, that's a compelling interest, right? Remedying the effects of past discrimination, that's compelling. So all they have to do is make sure that their action is narrowly tailored to achieve that objective of remedying the effects of past discrimination, and their action is going to be upheld under strict scrutiny, which is still our highest form of judicial review. Okay, so let's look at an example that'll help flesh this out. Probably one of the most seminal cases on this is going to be United States v. Paradise. In this case, what you had was the Alabama State Police Force, the Alabama State Troopers. The Alabama State Police Force basically is recognizing, and this is 1987, they're looking at their police force and they're recognizing that the vast majority of the police force is white. They look around and all of their state police force is white. And they look at the cause of this and they say, hey, you know, look, in Alabama and our hiring practices with our state police force, we have a long history of discrimination. You know, there were times where we absolutely excluded black applicants from becoming state police officers here in Alabama. So in 1987, the Alabama State Police Force says, let's remedy the effects of this past discrimination against black applicants. Black applicants applying to become Alabama State Police Force members or Alabama State Troopers. Let's look at a way that we can remedy the effects of this past discrimination. So the Alabama State Police Force comes up with this hiring practice that's referred to as the one-for-one hiring practice, where basically the Alabama State Police Force says for every white person we hire as a state trooper, we have to hire a black person to match that until we get our police force to 25% black. That's the goal here. And they look at the, census data and the statistics, and they say, look, if we were never discriminatory in our past, we think 25% of the force should be black. So to get there, we can implement this policy, right? This is going to remedy the effects of our past discrimination. So for every white person, we're going to add a black person with that white person until we get to 25% black. That's going to remedy the effects of this past discrimination. Of course, this hiring practice gets challenged under the Equal Protection Clause, and it goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court starts the analysis right here. It says when the government passes a discriminatory law or other discriminatory action based on a suspect classification, race is a suspect classification with the requisite intent to discriminate, this is facially discriminatory, the court will subject the law to strict scrutiny to determine whether the law is constitutional, even if the law purports to favor a protected class as a means of redressing the effects of past discrimination. Okay, so it's obvious here we have a law that purports to favor a protected class, but it's still discriminatory on the basis of race. Court has to apply strict scrutiny to determine whether the law is constitutional under the Equal Protection Clause. So the court applies strict scrutiny to determine whether this law is constitutional. Remember though, the Supreme Court has held that the government has a compelling interest in remedying the effects of past discrimination against a minority suspect class, so long as the discrimination was practiced by the government itself. Here, there's no question. It's undisputed. It's stipulated in the facts that the Alabama State Police Force has this long history of discriminating against black applicants, right? So this is easily shown that they have, discriminated against black applicants. This has resulted in an Alabama State Police Force that is almost entirely white, and they're trying to remedy the effect of this with this one-for-one hiring policy. So it's obvious here, there's almost no analysis. The Supreme Court says, yes, that is a compelling interest. What you are trying to achieve, even under strict scrutiny, that's compelling. We're good with that. The question is this the least restrictive means necessary to achieve this compelling interest? In other words, is this law or this action being taken by the state of Alabama narrowly tailored to remedy the effects of the past discrimination? Is it narrowly tailored to achieve the compelling interest, which is remedying the effects of past discrimination against the minority suspect class? And the Supreme Court analyzes this and they say, yes, in this case, this is narrowly tailored. This is not overly restrictive. Basically, when we look at this one-for-one hiring policy, this is a narrowly tailored way for Alabama to remedy the effects of the past discrimination against black applicants at the Alabama State Police Force. So what the Supreme Court ends up saying here is there are a lot of ways Alabama could have gone about this that would not have been narrowly tailored. Say, for instance, Alabama goes, okay, we recognize that we need to remedy the effects of past discrimination. So to get 25% of our police force black, we're going to just fire 25% of the police force that is white and replace them with black state troopers. If they did this, the court said, look, that would be overly restrictive. That would not be narrowly tailored. If you just fired 25% that were white and replaced them, okay, that's overly restrictive. That's not the least restrictive way you could accomplish this objective of remedying the effects of past discrimination. And they laid out all these other things that would be overly restrictive. Basically, if you weren't hiring any white people, or you were firing a bunch of white people. But here they're saying, look, white people can still apply. They can still become, Alabama state troopers. And this isn't lasting forever. It's a 1-to-1 until we get to 25%, which is the number we all agree it should be. Okay, so this is a pretty unrestricted way to get there. We're not firing any white people. We're not saying white people can't apply. We're just saying, hey, look, for every white person, we're going to take a black person until we get to this number we think we should be at. That's going to remedy the effects, and then this policy is going to end. That's pretty unrestrictive. That's a narrowly tailored way to remedy the effects of the past discrimination. That's the United States v. Paradise. That's an example of kind of affirmative action, being upheld as constitutional under the Equal Protection Clause. Okay, so it's important to recognize here that in any context, if the government is trying to remedy the effects of past discrimination against a minority suspect class, that's going to be considered a compelling interest. It doesn't matter if it's in, public schools, in admission decisions, in hiring practices, across any governmental departments. Anytime we see the government is trying to remedy the effects of past discrimination against a minority suspect class, so long as the discrimination was actually practiced by the government itself, that's a compelling government interest. And the analysis is going to come down to whether that's the least restrictive means to accomplishing that interest, whether it's narrowly tailored. Okay, similar to this, but in a far more limited context, we get this idea of diversity in higher public education. Okay, the most important thing to remember here as we move on past, the discussion of the compelling interest as a means of remedying the effects of past discrimination against the class, and as we move into diversity as the compelling interest, this entire concept of diversity only applies to the context of admission decisions in public universities, public colleges, post-secondary public education admission decisions is the only time we can really apply this concept of diversity. So if we think about our case we just talked about, United States v. Paradise, remember that's like a hiring decision at a government department. We can't apply diversity in that example like we're about to do it here, okay? And this is something I see mixed up a lot. And we'll talk about this again at the end. So as we move into our discussion, though, of diversity in higher public education, remember, this is a very limited context analysis. We're talking about admission decisions in places of higher public education, okay? In this context, the Supreme Court has held that public colleges and universities have a compelling interest in promoting their pedagogical goals by fostering a diverse student body. So exactly like our last analysis, therefore, these public institutions may implement admission policies that favor minority applicants so long as the policy is narrowly tailored to achieve their pedagogical goals by fostering a diverse student body. Okay, so we're changing the interest here from basically, the interest being remedying the effects of past discrimination. We're changing the interest to promoting diversity, but the analysis largely stays the same. Okay, the Supreme Court has held basically it's unequivocal that public colleges and universities have a compelling interest in promoting their pedagogical goals by fostering a diverse student body. Pedagogical goals are basically the institution's educational mission. If you look at any public college, any public university, they're going to have like an educational mission. And this is basically like, what is the goal we have for our students when they come to our university? Whether it's, the university level or, post-university level. It could be law schools, medical school, things even past your undergraduate degree, whatever it is. Every one of these public colleges and universities is going to have some sort of educational mission. When our student comes through, what's our goal for that student? And there's going to be goals in the classroom. There's probably going to be goals outside of the classroom. It's about the entire educational mission, the learning outcomes for the student that comes through this program. Okay, and basically what you have in this line of cases, like Grutter v. Bollinger, Gratz v. Bollinger, Fisher v. University of Texas at Austin, you have all these lines of cases that deal with admission policies that promote diversity at public colleges and public universities. Kind of what you see here is these universities are saying, look, we have an educational mission, and the only way we can accomplish our educational mission is by having a diverse student body. If everybody in our student body is the same, we're not going to be able to foster things like discourse. How can we teach leadership skills and building social skills and and having discourse, from unique experiences without a diverse student body? So basically, these higher education institutions are saying to accomplish our educational mission, we have to have a diverse student body. And the Supreme Court has basically said, look, we're going to defer to these public universities. If the public universities, public colleges are telling us that in order to accomplish their educational mission, they have to have a diverse student body, we're going to take their word for it. We're going to defer to them, and we're going to say that is a compelling governmental interest, right? Remember, we're talking about public education, public universities, public colleges that are basically arms of the government. The Supreme Court has held that these types of institutions have a compelling interest in promoting their pedagogical goals by fostering a diverse student body. So just like our last analysis, this is never in question. If we have basically, because the way this would typically play out on a constitutional law fact pattern, you're going to have a university or a public college, public university that has implements in admission policy that favors minority applicants in order to promote diversity, which is needed to accomplish their educational mission. Of course, you're going to have a person who is not a member of that minority class, who is not admitted into the university, and they're going to bring an equal protection challenge. And in those cases, the first half of the analysis, when we think about strict scrutiny, remember, we would go through the exact same analysis as we just did. The court's going to say, well, this is a discriminatory law based on a suspect classification. Even if it purports to favor a protected class, we have to apply strict scrutiny. So in those cases, the court is still going to apply strict scrutiny. But remember, here it's well established that public colleges and universities have a compelling interest in promoting their pedagogical goals by fostering a diverse student body. So the first half of that strict scrutiny analysis, the Supreme Court is saying, look, that's already answered. In these cases, in this context, absolutely, unequivocally, the public colleges and universities do have a compelling interest in fostering diversity. Therefore, really the only question is whether the policy being used to accomplish this goal of diversity is narrowly tailored to achieve that goal, to achieve the pedagogical goals of fostering a diverse student body. So again, the whole question comes down to, is the policy narrowly tailored? Is the policy not narrowly tailored? And in this context of admission policies at public universities, really what you see in this line of cases as the main theme, the Supreme Court wants to see universities, public colleges, public universities, when they're making admission decisions, they want to see these admission decisions being based on a holistic approach. Basically, one way to think about this, one way the Supreme Court has phrased this, is things like race, ethnicity, can be a plus on an applicant's application. So if an applicant is applying and they are, a member of some underrepresented minority at this university, that can be a plus on their application because they're bringing something to the table that this university wants. So it can be a plus. The deal is it just can't be the predominant factor. Once race, ethnicity becomes a predominant factor in an admission decision, that's where we say that's overly restrictive. That's not narrowly tailored to achieve their goal of fostering diversity. There's far less restrictive ways to achieve diversity rather than just, basically saying if you're this race, you're admitted. If you're not this race, you're not admitted. That's where we get into overly restricted ways or overly restrictive ways of achieving diversity. That would not be narrowly tailored. So one of the rules you get from the Supreme Court here is a policy is not narrowly tailored if it establishes quotas for members of certain racial or ethnic groups or puts them on separate admission tracks. This comes from Grutter v. Bollinger, a really seminal case on affirmative action and admission decisions at public colleges and universities. So basically what the court is saying is you can't have quotas or separate admission tracks. The problem with quotas is it's possible if you have a specified exact amount of members of certain racial or ethnic groups that you want to admit, that you lose this holistic approach in deciding who's admitted and who's not admitted. If you say we have to have in our student body 100 Asian members, we have to have this many of this race, this many of this race, this many of this race. But say we have to have 100 Asian students admitted. That's our quota for Asian students. Well, if only 100 Asian applicants apply, then by definition, to meet that quota, every single one has to be accepted. So now you've boiled your admission decision down to only being about race. It's no longer holistic. It's no longer looking at everything on the admission profile of this student. You're just saying, oh, you meet our race. We need it for the quota. We have to admit you. And the Supreme Court is saying that is not a narrowly tailored way to achieve a diverse student body. Same idea with separate admission tracks. Separate admission tracks would be the example where thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Legal Education Accelerator Program, or LEAP for short. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire 1L and 2L video library, integrated outlines, streamable audio versions, additional practice exams with explanations, and much more, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com/leap.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena and I'm currently a law student at South Texas College of Law, Houston.
Hi everybody, my name is Shiva and I'm currently a law student at Southwestern.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I am a first year student at South Texas College of Law, Houston. I used the Studicata study video series last semester to help me prepare mostly for contracts, and I actually made an A+ in contracts last semester, which I greatly dedicate to the Studicata videos.
By using Studicata to help me prepare for my final exam, I was able to score the highest grade out of my class on the final and even have my essay distributed as the model answer. Not to mention I had done quite poorly on the midterm and was struggling throughout the whole course of the semester, understanding the material and keeping up with lectures.
Because of the Studicata video lectures, I was able to go into my exams with a feeling of confidence. I didn't have to worry about what the rules of law were or how I was going to organize my answer to an essay question.
I would absolutely recommend the Studicata series and their online course materials to anyone. I think that they are not like professor lectures that you might find online or other outside study materials that you may encounter. I think that the Studicata videos really focus on not only ensuring that you understand the material that you're going to encounter on your final, but they also help you to understand kind of the best method for test taking, and they really break down how to approach each problem and the best ways to tackle certain methods on testing, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really special. I don't see that anywhere else in any of the other online resources that I've found. So I would certainly recommend Studicata to anyone who is studying in law school right now. Good luck on your studying, and you're going to do great.
I would definitely recommend Studicata to anybody watching this video. Give it a chance. I'm positive that you will love it, that you will get a lot out of it, and that you will be happy that you gave it a chance. I definitely am. I know I will be using Studicata in the future.
And I cannot thank Studicata enough for getting me through my first semester of law school. I will definitely continue to watch the Studicata video lectures throughout my law school career, and I highly recommend that any future or current law student do the same.